Hi everyone, I'm Nicole. Welcome to my channel. I'm going to be showing you how to make a fantasy bee. And if you're curious what that is, way back in 2016, I wanted to make a bee, but I wanted it to look like it came straight out of the fantasy world. And that's how I came up with this design. So I'm going to teach you how I did it. First, we're just going to gather up all our supplies, and we need to look at what a real bee looks like because we're basing it off of an actual bee. But here you can see the wings go a little more fantasy shaped. You can make it any shape you want, do your swirls any way you want, but you can see I'm using tracing paper. I'm basically making myself a template for the wings. That way they're even and they look really nice when they're done. This is tedious, but it's worth it. Now the first thing I needed to do was do some testing. I like sharing this with you because it shows behind the scenes what artists really need to do to make sure an idea will work. I'm using my old method along with my new method. I'm using Cosclay clay adhesive along with Cosclay clay adhesive, and you can see there's definitely differences. Cosclay is more clear and stretchy, while the Cosclay is more opaque and rigid. Now this is Cosclay legs. I always had my legs breaking when I used Cosclay no matter what I did. But with the Cosclay, you can go so thin and it will not break. It's really amazing. And now I know it's going to work and we can move forward with our bee. First, we're going to start off with the wings. This is going to be the most tedious part, but the effect is worth it, I promise. So we're going to use our glass over the template that we just made. This is going to help us get the same size wings and get the design that we want and get it really nice. Cosclay is a little bit stickier than some clays, but once you handle it, you learn how to work with it. Here I'm using tools because sometimes it tries to stick to my fingers, but you can see the process isn't really that hard, it's just a little tedious. Once I have my wings shaped up and trimmed how I want, I like to go over it with a paintbrush with a tiny bit of alcohol to get rid of any fingerprints on the clay. After my testing, I decided I wanted to use both types of liquid clay adhesive, and I add a little bit of glitter. Then you're just going to fill in the rest of the wing. This is going to make it look like an actual bee wing. It'll still be transparent, but it's going to give our wings some stability. I went ahead and made some cute little curly antenna because we're making this bee fancy. Now after baking, you can see how easy it is to just remove these with a razor from the glass. Being careful not to cut yourself on either. Here I like to put all my pieces into a little condiment cup so I don't lose them, which I'm pretty famous for doing, especially those tiny antennae. Now you can see with this reference the rest of the body parts we need to make. We're going to start with the thorax, which is the part where the wings connect. I start off with a ball and then I shape it kind of like a rounded square. I always check the wings to make sure I don't make it too big or too small. I realized I got some of my secret ingredient into my clay, which was fine with me. It looks gorgeous. Now we're going to work on the abdomen, which is the bee booty. So here I'm just flattening one end and then making it come to a point at the other. I'm going to show you from the side so you can see the shape we're kind of going for as well. You can see it comes down. It's going to fit on the upper part really nicely, and then I start blending them together. We don't want our bee falling apart. That would be embarrassing. Now we're going to add this line detail that goes down the back of the abdomen. I start off with just making the lines and spacing them evenly, and then I focus on taking those lines all the way around the body. I like to go over it with a thicker needle and make those a little more deep so I don't accidentally rub them off with my fingers. Now for the head, we start off with a triangle. Once again, make sure it's not too big or too small. I like to use a needle to mark out where my eyes are going to be and roll the needle around the two edges of the triangle. That's going to give us our eyes. It's a little tricky, but with some practice, you'll totally get it. Then I like to add this little mark down the middle of the head to kind of separate where the eyes are, give it a little bit of detail and interest. Now we can work on the mandibles. That's their little bee jaws. Here, the bottom of that triangle, I'm just marking it out with my needle tool. Once we have our triangle shape, I like to go right down the middle. This is going to give the appearance of those little bee jaws that they have. Once that's all done, we can put our head onto the body of our bee. Now, I totally forgot, but at this point I should have done fur texture all over the body to give it that cute fuzzy look, but I totally forgot. So we're going to move on to attaching the legs. I like to make some divots where the legs are. After that, I just make these very simple little tapered noodles, and I mark out where the segments are going to be. Insects have very segmented legs, so that's what we're doing with this simple technique. I like to go with 3, that usually works great for me. Then I can cut off the excess and bend it into shape. And voila, a surprisingly realistic little leg. I like to pinch the ends of the leg so it fits to the body a little smoother. And you can see right in the divot the leg fits in there nicely. You want to make sure it's attached really well. I like to do the longest legs, which are the back legs, and then I move on to smaller ones. The 2 front legs I like to make smaller, same technique, just much tinier. Once I have my legs all attached, I like to add a piece of clay. This is just going to help secure them, and it lifts up the body a tiny bit so that the face doesn't get squished. Did I end up squishing it anyway? Maybe. I'm still mad about it. Anyway, once your bee is done, you can stick it to the glass and then position your legs. Now for the wings, I like to mark out where they're going to be, and I use an X-Acto to cut a place for our wings to slide into. I push in the X-Acto and I twist it a little bit to make more of a cavity. You can see it slides in there really nice. I like to add some of the liquid clay in there. This is going to make sure our wing doesn't fall out, and I give it a nice little press. I do that on both sides and make sure those wings are really secure. Lock it in. Now that all of our major body parts are attached, you can mess with it. If you need to fix your wings, you can position your legs, and we're going to put in the antenna next. Here I'm using my super poker to poke a hole to put the antenna in. I tried out different ways and I like them facing up like this. My holes were a little too big, but that's okay. I just added in some spare clay in there and smoothed it out, and with a little bit of alcohol over it, you couldn't even tell there were gaping holes there. Next, we're gonna make this bee even fancier by adding fantasy beads. And if you're like, Nicole, why do you just keep adding fantasy in front of everything you do? I don't know, it's my style, right? So the concept is almost like making a bezel, like a setting to put a jewel into. We want it to look kind of hollowed out so that we can put stuff inside of it. This is how we're going to get the jewel effect that we want. I'm using my dotting tools here to just make a really nice round surface. That way it can hold it almost like a cup for the resin we're going to be putting inside of it. You can put yours wherever you want, however many you want. Sky's the limit. And since I'm fairies and fancies and not fairies and simple, I added a whole lot. Once you're done making the bases of all the beads, you can start adding in the micro beads. I like to poke a little hole, add some liquid clay softener in there, then put the bead in, and that will lock it in place so it can't fall out later. They're finicky, but really worth it. And about here is where I'm looking at it and realizing something is missing. I had forgotten to put on all of the fuzzy texture that I love so much and that makes it so much more interesting. So I went ahead and added it. It was tricky to work around all the details and the legs, but I managed to do it. Definitely do this part before you add on the wings and the legs and all of that. But you can see once you add on this fuzzy texture, it really becomes a little fuzzy bee that is so adorable. I went ahead and finished up the micro beads, and then I used a tiny bit of alcohol to get rid of any fingerprints I might have left on the legs, which is the only smooth part we have left. Now we can move on to coloring. Mica powders work great for this, but I love using these powders from Solar Color Dust. They're a little pricey, but definitely worth it, and you can see why. I'm using 2 different colors here, going with the striped bee pattern, and I'm making sure that the body contrasts the legs and so forth. You can add these powders wherever you want. If you accidentally get them somewhere you don't want, you can use a tiny bit of alcohol and a paintbrush to rub it off. Here you can see I'm using this gorgeous blue to go inside of where our fantasy beads are. I used a tiny bit of tin foil to support the wings, just in case they tried to droop. After baking, I can peel it off of our tile, and we get the first look at this cutie. But we have more work to do. After making sure that our legs are adequately bendy, which they are, we can move on to adding some detail, like the eyes. I decided to paint these because it was a little hard to add the powder to them. Then our special ingredient, once again, to put inside of the fantasy beads. And you can use glitter, you can use whatever you want that has some sparkle in it. I decided that our clay wasn't contrasting enough, so I just went over it with some silver paint. It really made it pop and stand out against the black and the other colors that I used. Then I painted on some details. After I painted all my details, I wanted to add a satin varnish just to make all of those pigments I use really stand out. You want to make sure it's going to be compatible with Cosclay because it is very bendable and you don't want your finish to crack. You do not need to put any type of varnish on your Cosclay, it's just if you want it to be more shiny. We're going to take some UV resin and fill up the cavities we just made. You want a nice dome on these to give that bead effect. You can also use crystals or gems if you'd like as well. In my InShots, I included what my older fantasy bees look like. I like showing people that your style and your skill will improve over time. It's just all about practicing. There are no shortcuts. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to subscribe if you don't want to miss out on my art content.